Do you know that you can paint a tree like this with absolutely no experience needed? Yes, you can do this too, and I'm going to show you how. You already know it's an anything art. Okay, so first thing, you want to start with a very pointed tip brush. These are technically called round brushes, but I call them pointed tip brushes. You see how it's very narrow at the end. This is great for drawing lines. So you want to use a brush like this. And then I like to thin my paint out. So what I do is I dip my brush into my water cup, and then I mix the water from my bristles into my paint. This way it thins out the paint and it makes it a lot more fluid and easier to draw your lines. Okay, so I'm just gonna dip into it, mix it around. And I also like to lay it flat and twirl it to make sure I keep that pointed part. It's really important that it's pointed when you're drawing trees. Now that we have that, we're gonna go ahead and draw our first line. So as I'm drawing this line, you're gonna notice I'm gonna start off with very light pressure because I want the top of the tree to be super narrow. And then the further I go down, I'm gonna add a lot more pressure to my brush. So that way, when I add pressure on my brush, it spreads my bristles and gives me a thicker line, especially at the root. So I'm going in again with very light pressure because I want a thin line. And then eventually I'm going to start to add more pressure on my brush, especially as I get to the root. I'm adding more pressure. Okay, and then once I have my line for the bark of my tree, I can flare it at the roots. So right here at the bottom, you can drag it out, flare it out towards the left, like that. Flare it out towards the right. Make sure you're adding some pressure. And then you can add some in between if you want to extend it. Like this, you can wiggle it a little bit, extend it. Here, wiggle and extend. Okay, so now that we have the main part of the tree, now we have to add branches. When you're adding branches, think of them like Y shapes. So I'm going to start with one, and you notice that it looks like a Y. So you can add it from, you can start from thin air and drag it into the main part of the tree, or you can extend from the tree, whichever way works. I like to mix it up. But however, we have to stick with the same technique of starting with a thin line. And then as we get closer to this part of the tree, we add more pressure. So I'm just going to come from thin air with very light pressure. That way I get a thin line. Think of it again as a Y shape. The closer I get towards the bark, I press more on my brush and drag it in. And there it is. It looks like a Y. And then I can keep going, splitting it off into twigs. So from here, I can drag it out, extend it. And look at that. It's another Y shape. So you have to think of it as traveling down a road and eventually it has to split off. Or again, think of it as Y shape. So I'm going to keep going, adding some more on there. So again, come from thin air if you'd like. Then drag it down. So I need to extend this one because I wanted to make sure it's even. You can make it a little crooked if you'd like. I'm randomly doing this. Wherever I want them, I'm just randomly placing them. Okay. Split this one off. They can also overlap. So maybe we'll extend one from here. We'll have that one overlap. And again, notice, even though I started in the reverse way, I started from here, I added more pressure. And as I dragged it along, I added less pressure, so it got thinner. Okay, and there's our tree. So we're gonna add on leaves next, and I'll show you guys how to do that. But before we do that, I wanna show you some things you should not be doing when you're doing your tree. So some things you should not be doing is try not to do your trees with like super straight lines. When you're doing them, you want them to be a little bit more realistic. Trees their branches are not super straight. They're a little bit wobbly, a little bit off. You see the difference between these two? When you're doing your branches, do not drag them down like that. That's not how you do it. You want to think of it as a nice Y shape. So here it is. It's a nice Y shape. Okay. Also, as you're making the branches, remember I said we start off a little bit thinner and then we gradually get thicker. So they should not be the same size throughout. They should also not be a drastic change. It should be a subtle difference between thin and thick. So what I mean by that, this will be drastic. So we'll start off a little bit thin and then we'll get thick. okay? It should not look like that. It should be very subtle, the change. So let's do one here. Let's make this one super subtle. Starts out a little bit thinner and then eventually, gradually, it starts to get thicker. Okay, you see the difference? So trees should not look like this. This is no. They should look like this. So this is how you would do it here. This is how we do not want to do it. Okay, now for the branches, I use a sponge. This gives me more realistic branches. Some people use a fan brush. Some people use so many different type of tools, but I love using a sponge. I like to dip into my water first to make sure it's not super sturdy. It's more flexible. Squeeze it out. And then I'm going to go into a dark green. So I mix my green with some brown. I'm going to dip into it. So when I'm adding the leaves on, you kind of start like a little bit darker. And then you're going to go into light, like a medium green and then a lighter green. So we start off dark. Let me add some more brown in there. Okay. And then you want to start off basically around the edges of the twigs and the branches. Let's start there. And we just go in and we tap it just like the edges first. You can start working your way in. Just lightly tapping. And then start to work your way in on the trees. So once you have it like that, it's still kind of like nice and airy. You can kind of still see the branches. Then we're going to go into just our green. So I'm going to rinse off my sponge. I'm going to go into my water and just squeeze it out. It does get messy working with the sponge. You get paint all over your hands. So we're going to squeeze it out and then we're going to go into our green. I'm going to add the green on top of the areas with the mixture of green and brown. I'm just going to lightly tap on it. And I'm not trying to cover up all of the greenish brown color. I just want it to slightly peek through. Branches in the center. Again, you want to try and keep it nice and airy so we still see the branches. It's just very light taps. And I'm not grabbing too much paint. I'm just grabbing right at the surface. Tapping on my tree. Keys to making sure you don't grab way too much paint. And then lastly, you can finish with a highlight color, like a tertiary color. That could be some white, maybe some yellow. I have yellow here, so I'm just gonna go right at the surface. Remember the keys not to grab too much paint. And then tap some of that yellow on the tree, just in random spots. I may add in a little bit of white as well, we'll see, depending on the look I'm going for. Want to take it a step further, you can add in like another color. Instead of like a brownish green, you can add in phthalo green, which is like a deep green. So you can grab a little bit of that and then add that in as well. I'll lightly tap it in. Now you can leave it like this and this will be perfect, but if you want to go a little bit more detailed, if you want to actually make it look even more realistic, you can go in and fine tune it by grabbing a brush. This is like a bigger rounded brush and kind of repeat the same process. So I'm starting with my green and I'm just tapping in there with my darker green, just random areas tapping on that. And then once I do my dark green, I can come in with my lighter green and continue to tap. Just add that lighter green right on top of my darker green. And then lastly, you can finish up with, again, a highlight color. I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of white. You can also use yellow. You have to do this while it's wet and just tap, lightly tap on there and highlight your tree. You want to keep tapping so it slightly blends in. If it's way too white like this, just go back into a little bit of green and tap on it. So make sure you do this while it's wet. The green has to be wet or the white is going to be way too opaque. It's going to stand out too much. Finishing up again with a little bit more white at the top of all the leaves. Lastly, you can go back in and kind of highlight some of the branches so it looks like it's kind of peeking through. And that's it, you guys. Easy step-by-step way that you can make a basic, realistic looking tree. So let me zoom in so you guys can see it. Okay, and I want you to comment below. Do you think you can do this? Because I know you can. If you found this helpful and you want to see more content like this, please make sure you comment below. Let me know what you need help with when it comes to painting. And I do have a beginner's acrylic paint course where I go more in depth into techniques just like this to make you a better artist. So if you'd like to purchase that paint course, I will link it in my description. Thank you guys for watching. Bye. Thank you guys so much for watching. I give tips on paint parties and tips to make you a better artist. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, and share. I'll see you guys in the next one.